Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to resume the series after the summer break and introduce the first installment for the quarterly FSR Insight, this time on securing Europe's energy future. And the first installment is called Navigating Global LNG Trade Dynamics and Geopolitical Challenges in 2040. I will be moderating the session, and Niccolo Rossetto will take care of the chat and the Q&A session. Hi, Niccolo. So our keynote today is Sebastian Zwickel-Berner. He's a postdoc at TUVM, and today he will present a very, very recent study that he has conducted with Anne Neumann on the evolving dynamics of LNG trade and the geopolitical challenges anticipated by 2040. He looked at factors such as regional conflicts, technological breakthrough in LNG extraction and transportation, and showing how all of these have influenced LNG trade flows and the direct impact on global energy security. He will be joined in the discussion by Anna Creti. Anna Creti is a professor at University Paris-Dauphine PSL. She's also director of the Climate Economics Chair and co-editor of the journal Energy Economics. Hi, Anna. And we also have Anouk Honoré. She's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, where she focuses on gas issues in the EU and also individual countries in Europe and South America. Hi, Anouk, welcome. So to our audience, feel free to share your questions, your comments and remarks in the chat as always, and we will address them in the second part of the debate. Now, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marzia, for the kind introduction, for the kind words. Really happy to be here. I will start sharing screen. I guess you see now my presentation mode.
We do.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. The next 15 minutes or so are dedicated for presenting, as Marzia just said, a work that has been recently published in Energy, together with Professor Anne Neumann from University in Norway, in Trondheim. My background, just to frame a bit my presentation, is in energy system modeling. So therefore also the title is Modeling Europe's Role in the Global Energy Market until 2040. To give a bit of a background or motivation for this work, of course, we are already ongoing in the clean energy transition, and there are different goals and strategies that have to be aligned, right, in order to successfully implement the energy transition. And in particular, in this triangle of sustainability, affordability, and supply security is the question of energy policy. And if we go to the carrier and energy carrier side as well, the question of what is the role of LNG in the future. I mean, just a bit of a flavor. In our paper, we comprehensively discuss also this frame or this label of a bridging technology, which has LNG. In the scientific literature, it has lower CO2 emissions than other fossil fuels, but still it is a fossil fuel. So therefore, literature comprehensively discusses and deals with this role of a bridging technology, which was actually the motivation why we looked into global LNG trade until 2040 and Europe's role. What the literature says is clear. It is a transition technology or a bridging technology, actually. And what is currently ongoing in Europe is illustrated here on the map. You can see European LNG infrastructure. Actually, the color code, I want to go into the details. But what you can see here is the different trends and drives actually that has been established in Europe in the last 2 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You can see some or most of the LNG terminals are already in operational, but also some are planned and under construction. So there is a strong movement towards more regasification capacities in Europe. We have already seen impacts on flexible prices of LNG in Europe. But what is most importantly, what should be emphasized here from my viewpoint, three different aspects. The first one is, as we already can observe clear on the market, that US LNG is a viable alternative to pipeline and piped gas from Russia in particular. So we have already seen significant increase of LNG from the US at the terminals in Europe. What we have also seen already at the market is that we have more flexible pricing mechanism than in the past. This is in contrast to the traditional oil index gas agreements, and it has also impacts. I have some slides actually in my backup, but we can discuss this later also in the panel about the different shares of spot market LNG, long-term contracts and mid-term contracts, and what this impact has on flexibility and variety of pricing in the US, in Europe. And the third aspect that should be mentioned, also related to my previous slide before, are the environmental concerns about methane emissions, LNG production, shipping-related emissions once we import LNG from all over the globe. When we look at the numbers, I just bring here one specific slide for Poland, for instance. It is a good example from my viewpoint. You can see two different lines here and developments. The one in blue, gas imports from east, and in dark blue, I would say LNG imports. And you can see here the significant increase in LNG imports, so therefore also an increase of the importance of LNG in the energy supply mix of Poland since, in particular, 2022. And you can see here that imports, for example, here given in BCMs, reach up to 6.5 just in 2023, and are also expected to increase in the next couple of months and years as well. So coming to our paper that we just published, where we addressed actually two different questions, and one I want to start here right before I go into the methodology that we applied for answering the questions. Which impact will geopolitical tensions between importing and exporting regions have on European LNG supply if global LNG trade were to be used as a political weapon? In literature, in the scientific literature, there is not much existing directly into answering this question, because of course the modeling tools are difficult. We have interconnections between LNG sector, natural gas sector in general, but also other sectors of the energy systems. So therefore we developed a new model, but to frame it a bit here, it is a rather simplified model, but it's tailor-made in order to answer our research questions. The focus of our optimization model is on the European supply and on associated costs in 2040, and in particular under two different scenarios. I will go into details a bit later, but we have one which is very ambitious in terms of reduction of gas demand in Europe. We call this net zero. And the other one is called persisting, which relates to a still ongoing high natural gas demand because we, for instance, delay of renewable investments. So therefore still a high natural gas and in particular LNG demand. We focus in our model on the flows, on the LNG flows between importing and exporting countries. And we tried to map and consider geopolitical tensions in 5 different cases. And overall in our paper, we specifically look at the research for Europe, but still our model captures also values for all the other regions, for instance, of Asia. As already mentioned, we have a tailor-made and rather also simplified optimization model. The objective function of our model is to minimize delivered ex-ship costs plus alternative supply-related costs. I will go into details just in a bit. And what is also very important in our model is that Europe here is right embedded into a global market. So therefore, we not only look at the European LNG market, but also in particular the LNG demand of developing countries in particular, which is expected to be grown substantially in the future. You can see here, I just brought one equation, but for an energy system modeling guy, the objective function is the most relevant. You can see here the 2 different parts that are included in the objective function. The left term here, global LNG trade, is related to delivered ex-ship costs and the minimization of it. The right-hand side is this alternative supply, which relates here to European domestic production equipped with CCS. So in our paper and in our analysis, we try to find the balance between importing of LNG, right, on the one hand side, but also this alternative to replace and substitute in the end imports of LNG by increasing and ramping up again European domestic production. Of course, we are aware, and we discussed this also in the paper, that in general, there's this trend of declining European domestic production. But here we equip it with CCS in order to compete with LNG imports in a net zero or decarbonization scenario. In general, the model is subject to 6 constraints, but I want to go into the details. You can find more information, of course, in the paper. As mentioned, we investigate the global LNG trade and in particular the European results for 2 different scenarios. One is called net zero and the other one is persisting fossil demand. You can see here the assumption regarding the total demand in MMBTU, but you can also see here the shares of European LNG demand on the global demand and how it differs in the 2 scenarios, where we have one with 20% in the persisting fossil demand, so a more impact share, I would say, on the European demand, and 30% in the net zero scenario. We base, in general, those scenarios on existing scenarios in order to be comparable. So coming to the question that is answered in the paper, how will Europe meet its expected LNG demand in 2040, given increased global LNG demand driven primarily by developing countries? And you can see the results that we present in the paper here on the slides. You can see on the left-hand side the supply share and the countries that cover European LNG demand in the net zero scenario for 2040. And on the right-hand side in the persisting scenario. Of course, as we assume in the persisting scenario a significant high global LNG demand, there's also the need for a higher number of exporting countries that bringing LNG to Europe. You can see, for instance, significant shares from Nigeria, of course, in both scenarios, but also in particular in the persisting scenario from the US. In the net zero scenario, I will summarize the result a bit like following. There are high shares from Algeria and Nigeria, highlighting the importance of African LNG exports to Europe, and also significant shares from Qatar to Europe. At the bottom of both slides, you can also see the supply costs in 2040 for Europe in the 2 scenarios. We present both the average supply cost, so meaning based on the delivered ex-ship costs and the amount that is transported to Europe. We calculated the average cost, but also the marginal costs, giving from an energy system modeling perspective a bit of an indication which is the price-setting exporter at the European level. And you can see, of course, which is also expected due to a higher global LNG demand, higher prices for both average and marginal costs in the persisting scenario. But I show this a bit more in detail later in my presentation. So coming to the question, which impact will geopolitical tensions between importing and exporting regions have on the European LNG supply? And we answered this, as I mentioned before, by investigating 5 different cases. So we have already the 2 scenarios, which were net zero on the one hand and persisting on the other hand. And we investigate as a second dimension, actually, 5 different cases. And you can see the number, the names of the cases here on the left-hand side. And I will briefly go through them. The first one is diversification. So case number 1 is we increase the required number of exporters to a specific region. For instance, setting it to 5 in order to have a diverse LNG supply portfolio. Second case is high price from Middle East. So as for instance, Qatar has comparable low LNG delivered ex-ship costs. We assume in case number 2, high price Middle East, an increase of those DES costs to Europe and all the other regions as well. Case number 3 has particular relevance for the European case, as we showed before, that Algeria and Nigeria, for instance, so 2 African exporters, have an important role in supplying LNG demand in Europe. We consider in case number 3 that no exports from African continent comes to other regions in order to assume that there is a priority in order to supply domestic demand first. Then we have a case Panama Canal restricted. I think this is obvious. And also for the European context, very important that Russia only exports LNG to Asian countries, for instance. This is case number 5. And what we show then in the results is to what extent these different cases in the 2 scenarios have an impact on the export volumes in our target year 2040. And you can see here just an example of results for other Europe. So these are those countries that can export LNG in Europe is, of course, mainly Norway, but also other countries included. So therefore, we named it other Europe. And you can see here how the export volumes vary between the different cases. Just to refer here to 2 extreme results, I would say. So in the net zero scenario, once we focus on diversification of LNG exporting countries, we see a significant increase in the importance of other Europe as an LNG exporter to LNG imports in Europe. But also, once we have no exports from African countries, there is also a significant increase in the export volumes of this region here. The details of the results can also be seen here. You can see in particular the numbers itself, but also the qualitative trend, how the export volumes per region developed in the different cases. You can see that some are more or less stable and some increase and some decrease. And I just want to bring here one particular aspect that was interesting in our paper, actually. Once we investigate the net zero scenario, just as here, one observation can be made that it's very difficult to identify general trends in the LNG market and trade flows. In contrast, for instance, in the persisting scenario, we have clear trends also in the different cases. So for instance, there is one exporter such as the US that still have high export volumes over all the different cases. But once we are in the scenario of net zero, as just shown here on the table, it's very difficult to identify clear trends which has, for instance, an indication towards how difficult it could be in a net zero scenario to agree on long-term contracts. The effects on supply costs in the different scenarios and cases is illustrated here. And this was also the intention or the motivation why we used such different and diverging scenarios as the net zero and the persisting fossil demand scenario. As you can see, the bandwidth of supply costs in Europe by 2040. And you can see here how the import and the average supply cost and the marginal supply cost vary over different scenarios and over different cases. And what is worth to be mentioned here is the role that I already explained a bit earlier from the no export from Africa case. You can see here that the highest increase of prices, in particular of the average supply costs, is in the scenario where no export from Africa is allowed in the model. So emphasizing once again the importance of African LNG exports for EU's LNG supply. Coming to the very last part of my results that I want to show here in the presentation, is there an alternative for domestic natural gas production equipped with CCS in order to substitute LNG imports? And you can see the results here. For the net zero scenario, we see no economic benefit for the EU in order to substitute LNG imports. So it is just too costly to substitute LNG imports, cheap LNG imports actually, that are available on the market in a net zero scenario. To substitute, you can see the production capacity is almost equal, never used in none of the 5 cases. In contrast, in the persisting scenario on the right-hand side, you can see that there is an open window actually and a gap that can be substituted or filled actually by domestic European production equipped with CCS, in particular in the 2 cases where we have no export from Africa, and also in the case where Panama Canal is restricted. Of course, this has a very strong impact on the delivered export costs from the US to Europe, and therefore makes it possible to substitute LNG imports by European domestic production, which is equipped with CCS in order to fulfill decarbonization net zero targets in Europe. So coming to my conclusions, actually 5 different points I want to emphasize at the very last slide of my presentation. We have seen complexity of Europe's strategy to simultaneously meet decarbonization targets and address energy security concerns. This was in the first place motivation for establishing new infrastructure for LNG, and this will also be, or it is expected to continue until 2040. Which is very interesting, or one aspect that we elaborated in our paper and which should be part of future work from our viewpoint, is to provide more insights into this competitiveness between LNG imports on the one hand side, but also opportunities for domestic European production equipped with CCS in order to fulfill decarbonization net zero targets in Europe. We have also seen that in the global LNG market, there is a significant role of Europe today in particular, but it's uncertain to which extent this role develops in the future. We only see a significant role of Europe in the LNG market globally in the ambitious sustainable scenario. In the persisting scenario, as we see a significant increase of developing countries, the ratio between European LNG demand and the remaining, I would say, is rather small. African exporters become crucial in terms of stabilizing LNG prices, and significantly also in terms of how to supply LNG demand in Europe. And as I also said a bit before and illustrated this on the table, once we have the strong development towards decarbonization and a net zero scenario, it's very difficult to identify truly stable trends in where are the exporters and where are the importers and where is this connection between both. We see more flexible trades from one node to another in a net zero scenario and in a scenario with lower global LNG demand. Okay, and with this, I would like to hand back, Marcia, to you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sebastian. This was very, very clear. So before we move on, just a friendly reminder to everyone participating in the audience to feel free to submit the question in the Q&A box. Nicola will monitor it. And so now let's move on with Anna. Any first reaction you have?
Thank you, Marcia, for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Sebastian, for this very nice piece of work. Together with my colleague and friend Anne. You have addressed a very difficult question, that is integrating in economic modeling with all the specificities of these huge models, the idea of geopolitical tensions, bridging therefore something that is the economical part and also, let's say, the political science part. And I think that maybe my questions will be at the crossroads between the two, because making this bridge is, of course, a little bit difficult, and we, as economists, maybe would like to know a little bit more. So to be fair, also with you, we didn't have the paper before, so I'm really reacting to what I've heard now. I wanted first to have a very brief set of questions on some assumptions that you may have done, and it is useful perhaps to specify, which is your setup. So you assume that in terms of pipeline connections, the situation will be the one that we observe today, or you make specific assumptions? In particular, what about the capacity? I don't say Nord Stream 2 because it does not, I mean, perhaps it won't be used, but Nord Stream 1. So you say differently. You assume that the already geopolitical tension that is in place used therefore pipelines as a weapon from the point of view of Russia remains as such. The second assumption that I would like to understand is what about the development of spot markets? So the three of them, of course, LNG, spot, and pipelines are the way to secure imports. And in the sense that LNG are crucially related to also spot markets and price signals. And all of them are related to who are the players in such markets. Knowing that actually Russia is still there. So there is this paradoxical situation in Europe where there is no, there are no sanctions for gas. However, the pipelines are empty and the LNG terminals or the LNG shipment. So, which is your view or your assumption on that? It would have been interesting going further on this idea of pricing to show the price differentials on the different hubs and different scenarios, because you have been focusing on the quantities, and I guess that those are the results of arbitrage. And any time also that we make scenarios, the idea is also to understand how the costs are going, therefore, to change, to increase, or maybe decrease, because we have seen that in the past, at least, the growth of the LNG has been due to also economies of scale and decrease in the gasification and regasification costs. So which are your assumption on that or views on that? Coming to the results on this important role of emerging countries, I agree with you that what is going on in Africa is something that should be under the spotlight much more than what it is actually, because we tend to forget all the movement over there. Making just the example of Mozambique is one of this case. However, you may be a little bit optimistic in the sense that my view on the results is that saying that Africa becomes the swing supplier, right, to call it like this, assumes that there is also the capability of African countries to go on and build all the infrastructures that they need in order to get to that point. And there, in Africa as well, there are a lot of geopolitical tensions and local conflicts, despite the investment from foreign companies, because most of those infrastructures are led by I don't know if we can say fortunately or unfortunately, but from global players. And finally, if I understand well, the persistent scenario is a little bit like business as usual. That is, actually, we don't know what is going on, whether we will be able to reach the net zero, but the idea is that if we don't shrink gas demand, we will need more and more complex merit order of importers to secure our supply. And I have a last question, but I leave it for later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Sebastian, would you like to respond or right away? Maybe. So then.
Yes. Yeah, sure. I took notes in order to, group a bit your statement, Anna. Thank you very much for your comments and for your opinion on my presentation. I grouped it actually now into 4 parts. 3 I can answer, I guess, but one maybe I can then come with a question back to you. The first question or your statement started a bit with this question about the pipeline connection and this trade. So in general, we did some desk research and data analysis and stuff and compared with other papers and publications. So the demand that we have considered in our model is purely the LNG demand. So there is so we have already subtracted which could be imported, for instance, via Norway, via pipelines to the EU. So this amount is really like the demand at the terminals, at the regasification stations, at the coast in the EU. So therefore, there are assumptions which that there is still imports from piped gas. Of course, it's very difficult to estimate the value that comes from piped imports from the east here in our scenarios, but we have still pipeline imports that substitute. I mean, the total gas demand is then put into two fractions, actually. Piped gas demand, which is not considered in our model and cannot be substituted. And the pipeline connections are there. This also relates a bit to the second part of your comment about spot market. I mean, what we have assumed is that the capacities that are already planned and and under construction will be established or will be able to be operated in 2040. So it is like the plan from today will be in operation 2040. This is it. What we on top have assumed that there are uniform prices at the terminals, at the LNG terminals in Europe. So we assume in the end, in the mainland of the EU then, that there are enough capacities between the LNG terminals in order to ensure a uniform price in the EU. I mean, we have seen already by increasing regasification capacities, a smaller divergence, right, between TTF prices, for instance, and LNG hub prices. So this is a bit the main assumption of this of our model. But in general, we can also show the results for each of the different terminals. So once we neglect this significant expansion of pipeline capacities, it will be also possible to show the results for each of the terminals. But still, in our analysis, we have assumed that there is enough pipeline capacities to ensure a uniform price. The third question, or my third comment, a bit answering to your comment regarding the role of African exporters or the development of LNG import-export values from African countries. I fully agree with your concerns or with your opinion about this stability and how it develops and stuff. I think I would also agree that we have here very, wouldn't say pragmatic, but maybe a conservative assumption that there is a significant LNG demand in developing countries and how Europe can behave or develop or act actually in this environment. I would definitely agree from a modeling perspective that it would be helpful to include, I wouldn't call it a willingness to pay, but also a bit like this ability to pay the LNG price that is required in order to import the values. So from a modeling perspective, it is not very complex to include this. I would fully agree with you. And this is definitely what I can take away from this discussion here, that this ability to pay actually, and all the monetary resources that are required in order to invest into regasification terminals, the infrastructure and stuff, is definitely something that could be extend our work. I fully agree with this. And my fourth point here is a bit like a question back to you, Anna. I mean, this question about economies of scale, I fully agree with you. And this is also in the energy system modeling community, a very interesting aspect of how we exogenously include learning rates, for instance. So something like this, economies of scale, or is it like endogenously to have to be put into the model once we have, for instance, more LNG terminals, then N+1 terminal will be cheaper. But maybe you can frame a bit or clarify a bit more on this aspect of economies of scale, because I think this is very relevant in general in energy system modeling. But I would like to hear what you have in mind here in the context of LNG.
First of all, thanks for clarifying your assumption and your views on the system modeling perspective and how you get the results. So my question was that underlying the idea of there is somehow an idea of dispatching there, right? You are going to include more and more diversified supply if you need more gas. Therefore, I guess that you do it in an efficiency perspective, then you are going to rank those countries in an increasing cost perspective of depending on the distance on one side and depending depending also on how the contractual agreements are going to reflect those costs, physical cost. And also there could be also another tiny but important perspective on importing cost, that is a COB, or so all the determinants of the cost. So my idea was to understand which is the assumption that you take on the development of those costs, and whether also there is something that has to do with integrating technologies like floating LNG. You have shown the case of Poland. Poland is one of the first European countries to have introduced floating LNG. But for instance, now we have been told by professionals that the further slots for floating LNG for the moment are just closed. Because I mean they are subject to a very long assessment, even if it is less constraining that for physical terminals, and the construction time is shorter. Still, there are constraints. So it was kind of going a little bit deeper on the technological side.
Yeah, I see. Regarding, I fully agree, these floating LNG terminals and the role of those technologies are very important. We have, as we model here the target year of 2040, we have assumed that there are these capacities under construction and that our plant are in operation independently, whether or not these are floating floating LNG terminals or really like on the coast itself or on the shore. So this hasn't been a very important aspect of our model, honestly speaking. But coming back to your aspect of economies of scale, I'm very sorry to bring up once again this issue of data availability, but I fully agree with you. Once we have such information about, for instance, how costly it could be, or in which way the costs or the exporting costs then develop, if it is a higher share of using the resource on a specific node, we could definitely include this into the model. But I think just from a modeling perspective here, this kind of information would be that critical. So once you include this functionality into a model, I fully agree it makes sense, but how to empirically scale this information? So to what extent delivered airship cost from node A to node B develops if there is a utilization rate over time from 35 to 45%?
No, you can only simulate them for the moment. There is also potentially another aspect, that is whether, for instance, CBAM is going to evolve to include gas. This is also something that could change import costs. But I mean, I think that we have other
Yes.
questions that may come later.
Yes. Thank you, Anna. And thank you, Sebastian, for your replies. So now I know Anna has an additional question, but we can have it for later. Now, Anouk, any input from your side?
You noticed that
No,
she seems to drop out.
Yes, I've noticed that. So maybe we can move on to the question from the audience, Nicola, if there are any, and we wait for Anouk to be back.
Yes, Sebastian, we received a question from Marco, and well, it's more maybe a detail, but he wonders why US costs in your research are so high compared to other regions, and if you could elaborate a bit on the assumptions around the US gas market that you used in your work.
Nicola, could you repeat just the part, which costs are high?
The US cost, I assume he refers to the cost of LNG from the US.
Okay. Just as Anna said, the main driver from a modeling perspective, and for the empirical scaling, therefore, is the transportation itself. So of course, there are also included the costs for liquefaction, but also for regasification. But in general, it's like the transport costs. And here it is mainly the costs for the length itself, right? So the distance, but on top also the fees for insurance that we have included. So the cost function, let me jump. Yeah, so we described this in detail in the paper. So maybe I can share, or we can share after the presentation also the paper. But we have all the information, the costs are related to the chartering cost, the bunker price, the losses, the time that it takes to bring LNG from node A to node B. So therefore, my answer would be this is the main driver why I guess the costs for the US are comparable high, because it is simply far away to bring energy from US ports to the EU. This is the main reason in the model, I guess, as my answer. But all the details are explained here, and the information for the cost function that is the underlying driver actually for the optimization.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yes, at the moment there are no other questions apart from Davide that would like to have access to the paper, but
Yes.
this is
I can answer to Davide. The paper is already available. There is a link on our webpage for the FSR Insight to the study. So you can go there and download it directly from there. So I don't see Anouk. Maybe we can go back to Anna, because I know you had an additional question, right?
Yes, thanks. I wanted to have another insight on the assumptions that you make in terms of the arrangement that is actually in place for the trading platform. That is a mechanism of response to Europe, to the energy crisis, to the gas crisis. So you say that somehow Europe in your model is just a copper plate, right? So there's a unique price. So I guess that somehow you assume that there is this centralization of needs. However, from the geopolitical point of view, I don't know. Maybe I don't buy it until the end, because I think that this way of creating coordination in Europe was somehow forced by the energy crisis. I guess that the way in which the evolution of also gas demand and internal policies is going to put this assumption a little bit, I would say, at risk, in the sense that there will be perhaps group of countries that are going to detach themselves. There will be also, I mean, additional constraints on gas prices. I was talking about the CBAM, but actually we have also another directive that is going to be implemented, that is the gas prices, CO2 gas prices to final users. So basically, again, all these drivers of the European demand, how do they evolve?
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for your comment. If I understood your point of criticism correctly, I would answer the following. I mean, as I said, my background is in energy system modeling. So what we typically do is we try to consider as much as sectors at the same time as possible, right? And try to understand the interplay between, for instance, the electricity sector with the natural gas sector, with LNG imports and stuff. There are a lot of very good models that can in detail consider LNG import prices from Terminal 1 and B and C and 3 and so on, and have a detailed consideration of the gas network in the background and stuff. But what they typically have, they have just simple assumption regarding the import LNG prices, this specific terminal, for instance. So this is like the interface a bit, and also the connection point, I would say, for not only future work, but also to the scientific community, because our paper tries to bring up on the table the import prices at the specific hubs that could be then used for modeling the European energy system more in detail based on our assumptions regarding, for instance, the scenarios, the demand development, and maybe also uniform prices. So I would say that our results should be the input for a follow-up analysis for an energy system model more in detail on the power sector, industrial sector, where we use LNG, where we use natural gas in general, to understand the interplay and interconnection between both. But I think that there is a benefit for those models that I referred to, the energy system models on a European scale, for instance, one node per country or so, because they really seek for such information at which price can we import LNG at which terminal, because it has a strong impact on, for instance, renewable investments or the timing of renewable investments. And of course, also storages, operations, and all the other things that we haven't included in our model, as we just have actually a copper plate, as you just said, for LNG trade within Europe.
Thank you, Sebastian. So Anouk has lost her connection, so we're trying to get her back. But in the meanwhile, maybe Nicola, I see there are a couple of more questions from the audience.
Yes, so we have Hamza that she's curious about another importing country. She would like to know from you, Sebastian, what is your view on the role of Qatar as a strong player globally, and especially with its ambition to be more active in the LNG trading business? So if you could elaborate on what the messages are from your model about the specific case of Qatar, which I at least I understood that it changed role depending on the two fundamental scenarios that you identified. Thank you.
I'm sorry for jumping through the slides. I just wanted to show this slide once I answer the question. Thank you very much for the question. Definitely a very important aspect of our work, or in general of the LNG development in the future. What will be the role of Qatar? I show you here just the results for other Europe, right? And you can see how the liquefaction capacity is utilized in the different scenarios and in different cases. What we see for Qatar in our results is that in literally actually almost all cases, the utilization rate is almost 100%. So Qatar in our model definitely knows where to export LNG, not necessarily to the EU and Europe. So this is the reason why we have Qatar in some scenarios, and in some cases it's importing to Europe, but in some not, because it's from the model perspective, but also for Qatar, just beneficial to export to another node. So utilization rate of exporting capacities and export volumes of Qatar is actually in all cases, almost 100%. So really finding some nodes where to export LNG from Qatar.
Thank you. Very, very, very clear. So they will not have problems to sell their gas, basically. This is your message.
And I would like to challenge you a little bit more, Sebastian. They more than being also in the trade, they own the terminals. So I think that they gain on both sides, selling their gas and also making the other pays for the usage of infrastructure. So they have been really in a good logic of forward-looking, exploiting the European dependence.
May I answer here?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, Anna, thank you very much for your comment, and I fully agree. I mean, I work together with Marzia also in the direction of material flows and just this different actually parts of the supply chain. Just as you said, production is the one side, but also you have the dependency on the terminals itself, but also for the materials, for instance, it could be not only the mining, but also the reprocessing or the processing actually in the supply chain. So I think in general, not only the modeling community, but also policy should be more head into the direction of understanding the different parts of the supply chain and where policies are needed in which direction in order to reduce this dependency, for instance, but also at the first place, also make them transparent. I think both is very important also for the research community to have access and information about this, because once we have it, for instance, it could be easily just included into the model to better understand this strategic behavior of an exporter, because they not only do the production side, but also own the terminals itself. I fully agree here. Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian. Any more question online,
From
Nicola?
the audience, no. From the
Okay.
audience, no. Maybe just I'm not a modeler, Sebastian, so I trust many of your things, your statements. I cannot fully challenge them, but it's interesting to see from your exercise the price level you systematically forecast is, let's say, in historical terms, okay, not extremely high, but let's say closer to the high range. I mean, and definitely higher than prices for gas in the US, at least in the last 2 decades. So I assume that this is also could be an important message that can be read from your paper, that maybe Europe will not have physically problems in procuring LNG, but it seems that it will have to continue to pay a relatively uncompetitive price for the gas, especially for marginal ships. Am I correct, Sebastian?
Yeah, I fully agree. In general, in the paper, we put both, like the average supply cost as an indication for prices, right? Because once again, I mean, it's very important to highlight that our model bases on delivered ex-ship costs. So we don't have the impact of long-term contracts. This is rather an indication for spot market prices, I would say, but still, I would carefully treat them. I mean, it's an indication, a projection in which direction it could go based on delivered ex-ship costs. But I fully agree. In general, once we look at the marginal supply costs, they are not extremely high, but rather high, right? Just as you said. I agree. I think also we promised this in future work of our paper, also to include stronger, or more importantly, also this impact of long-term contracts, because just as you said, actually the LNG market is is of course more complex, much more complex than we have modeled it here. And we have the interplay between long-term, mid-term contracts and spot market on top. I think in general, we see that, for instance, in Europe, as we have long-term contracts that could exceed, right, the LNG demand right in 2030, sorry. Once we reduce, for instance, gas demand, just as promised in the Repower EU, by 30%, it could be that we have excess LNG that should be then sold on the spot market. So I think it's important, of course, as always, to treat the modeling results carefully and interpret them in the right way. But it's an indication here, and are comparable high or higher than we would like to see, of course. But still, transportation costs are the main driver for the delivered ex-ship costs that we have in the model.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so I don't think Anouk will join us at this point. So I think we can close this very, very interesting debate. Thank you all for being part of it. Thank you very much, Sebastian, for sharing your findings, and to Anna for being with us and for your brilliant questions. So Nicola and I, we look forward to reconnect with our audience for the second installment of our FSR Insights, which is going to happen on October 23rd, and it's going to explore advancing climate justice, integrating fairness into policy and practice. So a very new topic for the FSR, but nonetheless very interesting. So you can already register online for the webinar on our website. And so see you next time.
The timing is a bit different from our usual, right, Marzia?
Yes, I forgot.
It's not
Thank
at
you,
2.
Nicola. Yes,
it's
yes. It's
up
going
to
to be
30
at, yes,
or 3.
Yes, but you will have all the information on the website. Thank you, Nicola, for that. See you next time.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Hello.